The idea of karma, that's rather typically Hindu. Yeah. You see, some people, for example, believe that it's a reward to be reborn. That not everybody gets reborn, you have to deserve it. Whereas the Hindu conception is almost the reverse. You know, it's almost a punishment to be reborn. You have to get rid of this fatal tendency to get reborn again and again.
The cycle
That's what Buddhism is about. Yeah. In the Vedas, you have the idea of action at a distance. That there is called karma. Karma there is not automatically rebirth. Karma is the fact that when you perform a Vedic ritual, you get a result. Like, for instance, you know that you'll have to face the enemy, so you do a Vedic ritual hoping for victory in battle. So there, ideally, you perform this ritual, and the fruit of the ritual is caused by some unseen mechanic, which materializes tomorrow on the battlefield in victory.
Namaste. Today at Sangam Talks we have Dr. Koenraad Elst. He's a Belgian Indologist, he's an author, he holds a PhD in Hindu nationalism, and for Sangam Talks, Dr. Elst is not a stranger anymore because he has given several talks on several topics, themes and areas, and also introduced a lot of concepts from the Western perspective to the Indian listeners. But today we are here to talk about Dharma, Swadharma and Karma. Dr. Elst, welcome to Sangam Talks.
Namaste.
Dr. Elst, Dharma is something which the world has been following. In fact, the universe has been following the path of Dharma. Yes. Because it is timeless, it is endless, and therefore it's called as Sanatana Dharma. Could you throw some light about Sanatana Dharma?
Yeah, well, one thing that all the critics say is that Sanatana Dharma isn't Sanatana. That the name Sanatana Dharma is recent, like 19th century. It has to be seen as the traditionalist answer to Arya Dharma. Now, the Buddha already called his own thing Arya Dharma, but you see the term became very prominent in the late 19th century when you had the creation of the Arya Samaj, the society of the Vedicists. That's what they meant by Arya Dharma. You see, the word Arya is a Vedic term for the Vedic people themselves. It's a self-referential ethnic term. So it's used by a number of tribes, not only in India, to refer to themselves. The Iranians call themselves Arya, and indeed that's where the word Iran comes from. Iran is from Aryanam Kshatra, the Kshatra, the domain of the Aryas. It is used in the same sense also in Hittite and in Vedic. And so it has a connotation of elitism, the upper class. And there has been a lot of debate among philologists about the ultimate etymology. So it's clearly from a root ar. But, what is the meaning of that? Does it come from Ari, which means enemy, or which means the man to be beaten, the front runner? And so Arya can be a derivative of that. So then that means the ones on top, and it seems to always get that meaning, but the Vedic people use it in self-reference. And so when the Vedic culture, which starts with the Paurava tribe and the Bharata dynasty within the Paurava tribe, when that exceeds the Paurava context and starts to be taken over by other tribes, who invite Vedic specialists to come and settle in their agraharas, in specially, set apart neighborhoods or villages with tax exemption and so on, to attract them, to come over to settle in the south or in Bengal or so. So when that goes beyond the confines of the Paurava tribe, which settled in Haryana, that's the original Vedic territory, so it spreads all across India, then the word Arya comes to mean Vedic. And so it is very probably in that sense that the Buddha uses it. So you get the Chatvari Arya Satyani, the Four Noble Truths, or the Arya Ashtangika Marga, the eightfold, the Noble Eightfold Path. So that word noble, that's translated as noble, is actually the word Arya. And so many people take noble in the moral sense of being generous, dutiful, everything that is associated with the nobility. But that moral sense is actually a derivative from the sociological sense of upper class. You have exactly the same semantic evolution in English, where the nobility originally refers to the upper class in feudal society, and therefrom gets the moral meaning of, being generous, being dutiful, being, cultured, being civilized.
Righteous.
Yes, righteous. So that's a derived meaning that's also there, but originally it means sociologically upper class. Now there are passages in the preachings of the Buddha where it clearly has that sociological sense. The Buddha himself has said that his teaching is called Arya because it is the teaching of the upper class. He himself explicitly says it's the upper class that has these values. It comes with being an elite character. So you see, some people say, oh, you see, the Buddha was the natural religion of the untouchables, of the poor people and so on. Sorry, that's not the case. I mean, we also know the caste background of the people recruited by the Buddha into his order. Most of them were upper caste. And so he himself, of course, was on all hands an upper class character. He was the son of the president for life of the Shakya Republic. So he was not a prince in the feudal sense. He was not automatically fated to become the successor to the throne or so. Because it was a republic, it was not a monarchy. Nevertheless, as the son of the president for life, he was, of course, in a very good position to become the successor. From 20 or so onwards, he was a member of the Senate of the ruling assembly, and apparently he was also very talented, a good speaker and so on. He was a natural leader, so he would have become the president for life in his turn had he chosen to do that. But so he felt a vocation to become a sadhu. Why? Because he was impressed by the sight of a sadhu. He didn't invent this. I mean, nowadays there is this whole school, not just among Ambedkarites, amateurs, and that is putting it nicely. No, you see, among Western academics and their imitators in India, you have this whole notion that everything good in Hinduism comes from the Buddha. The Buddha invented everything. Yoga comes from the Buddha. Now this is so much nonsense. Of course you have the Upanishads and other places, passages in the Vedas, where you see plenty of yoga centuries before the Buddha. Then when you read the Buddha's own life, you see he studied with Shankya teachers, this Arada Kalama, this Ramaputra, and so he learned from them and he integrated their teachings in his own curriculum. And when he had reached Nirvana, the first thing he did was to appeal to them, you see, to go trace them in order to tell them about his new discovery. It turned out they had died already. So then the next thing he did was to go tell these 5 monks that he had practiced with. And so that's when Buddhism started. He finds them in Sarnath, and so that's where the Buddhist teachings begin. After, according to the story, Brahma appearing to him and telling him, don't keep this nirvana for yourself, go teach it. So that's where Buddhism starts. Anyway, but so that's Arya Dharma. Arya Dharma is the noble teaching, but noble in the sense of carrying Vedic civilization. So what he seems to say is that his teaching is Vedic. Now, probably this is in the sense that you often see in religious history, namely going back to the sources. So that's not a modern phenomenon, fundamentalism going back to the foundations. That has always existed. That's what they do time and again. And so that apparently is the case with the Buddha. He goes back to the sources because the Vedic teaching has, become decadent, has lapsed into empty ritualism. And I'm not against ritual. Ritualism is not automatically empty, but it risks after a while becoming an automatism and indeed, becoming empty. And so, you see, he infuses it with life, with meaning, because he rediscovers the Vedas. And he praises the Vedic rishis. He names them by name, you see, Bharadwaj and Vishwamitra and Vasishtha and so on. He quotes from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, from the Rishi Yajnavalkya, and so on. So, he is entirely in the footsteps of what he calls the earlier Buddhas, the earlier awakened ones. Mm-hmm. So, the Buddha does not claim to bring anything new, just like Jesus didn't claim to bring anything new, okay?
It has always been there. It's just that.
Now, in the case of Jesus, you can say, well, he didn't claim to be new, but what he taught was actually new. In the case of the Buddha, it's hard to find anything new. The whole idea of meditation, the whole idea of renunciation, that desire is the problem, this you find in the Upanishads, perhaps even earlier.
It's there in the Vigyan Bhairav Tantra also. Mm-hmm. It's there in the Vigyan Bhairav Tantra. The meditative process.
Yes,
of
but the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, you could say, well, but that's very post-Buddhist. That's in the Middle Ages. That's like 1500 years after the Buddha. That doesn't prove anything. Like, Hindus say all the time, but the Yoga Sutras. Now, the Yoga Sutras probably are post-Buddha. Okay? Now, they themselves, of course, also don't claim to be original. The Yoga Sutra is conceived as a correction to the degenerative trends that go by the name yoga at that time. As one of these modernists, Mark Singleton and what's the other guy's name? Anyway, like Philip Maas and so on, many researchers in the West now say, you see, yoga is a fairly recent thing, is in fact a thing that we can't trace farther back than the Buddha. That I think is wrong. You can trace yoga a lot farther back. But nevertheless, you could say that, the Buddha gets serious about it. Until then, yoga is a lot associated with miracle working, with strange things. And so he makes it something very rational, which is good. Now, I would give a lot of other people credit for many of his ideas, but I'm not against people following the Buddha. After all, if they walk in his footsteps, they can't help walking in the footsteps of many earlier people whom the Buddha acknowledged as preceding him and teaching essentially the same thing. Anyway, so we were talking about Arya Dharma.
Yeah.
Right. Now, when the Arya Samaj in the 19th century starts teaching Arya Dharma, they mean very explicitly, see, in the Buddha, probably that's what he means. In the case of the Arya Samaj, it's totally explicit, is the Vedicist society. So they go back to the Vedas. Now, one thing they find about the Vedas is that there's no caste in there. Even the Purusha Sukta, that according to the Ambedkarites is all about caste, actually there's no caste in there. You see, what the Purusha Sukta says is that there are 4 functions in a developed society. Maybe among hunter-gatherers, everybody's a hunter, everybody's a gatherer, and so on. But when you get a more complex society, you get a division of labor.
Yeah.
So you get these 4 different functions. Yes, that the Purusha Sukta does say. What it does not say is, you have to do the same thing that your father did. There is no hereditary profession. What it does not say is, you have to marry a woman whose father did the same thing that you have chosen to do. There is no endogamy.
Yeah.
Now, these are the 2 defining traits of caste. You can't speak of caste unless you have this hereditary profession and endogamy. That, by definition, is caste. That's not there in the Purusha Sukta. So, to identify the Purusha Sukta as a source of caste is a complete mistake in the case of the Ambedkarites. But, truth to tell, of course, that's a mistake that they take over from the traditionalists, who have been using the Purusha Sukta as a justification for castes like the past 2000 years. Not yet at the time of the Purusha Sukta. I repeat, caste is not present in the Purusha Sukta. But when caste becomes the norm, and you can check it genetically, because after all, society falls apart into box-type communities because of endogamy. You see, within the groups, you see, people marry within their group, and so after a number of generations, they really become distinct genetically. So, their genes tell the story of this division in box-type communities. That can be traced back some 2,000 years. And in the life of the Buddha, you see it starting. A very important episode in the Buddha's life is the Shakya Hatya, the massacre of the Shakyas. Why does it happen? Well, the Buddha's friend, Prasenajit, the king of Kosala, of Ayodhya and that region, he's successful in life, he conquers and so on, and he thinks that he has reached the stage where he is entitled to a wife from the Shakya tribe, because the Shakya tribe is very prestigious. They are deemed to be the straight descendants of Manu. Now, he sends feelers to the Shakyas, you see, I want one of your girls. And the Shakyas say, well, they don't say that. They say that among one another, but not to him. They say, well, do we want one of our precious girls to, be thrown away on this interloper? Okay, he may be powerful, but he's not one of us.
Yeah.
Then again, because he's powerful, we have to keep him as a friend. We can't afford to offend him. So they marry off one of their girls, but not one of their princesses. So their president for life, who's no longer the father of the Buddha, because the Buddha is already an old man at that time, like many successful men, has some concubines on the side. And so with one of these women, he has a daughter. And so he passes her off as a princess, gives her to the king of Kosala. And, they get married and they have a son, Virudhaka, or in Pali, Vidudaba. And so he grows up and he goes to meet his family on the Shakya side, and he discovers the true story. He finds out that his mother is not a real Kshatriya, at least not on her mother's side. She is a daughter of the president for life, but her mother is only a maid. And so he gets angry with his father. He says, now how could you be so foolish, to get this non-Kshatriya lady passed off as a princess and so on. Now I am not a Kshatriya.
Okay.
And so Prasenajit consults his friend the Buddha. Because the Buddha is often consulted, and not for spiritual matters, but for very worldly matters. Because you see, he's of a high provenance himself. But unlike all the other kings, he has no political function anymore. He's a monk. So he left all the, royal ambitions behind. So he's also trustworthy. You see, he doesn't try to serve himself through the advice he gives others. So he says, well, there is really no problem. You see, your boy is a true Kshatriya because you are. Caste is passed on in the paternal line. The mother doesn't matter. So clearly that was the old view of caste. And indeed, in earlier generations, that's exactly what we find.
Yeah.
The classic example is Vedavyasa. Vedavyasa is a title, the editor of the Vedas, given to a man called Krishna Dvaipayana, Krishna born on the island. And so he is the son of a sage, Parashara, and a common girl, namely Satyavati, who operates a ferry service across the Yamuna. So, one of her customers one day is this Parashara. So they cross the river. It takes some time to cross the river. And so they get to know each other and they like each other. And they stop at an island in the middle of the river and they make love. And so that's where Vedavyasa comes from. So the father is a sage, is in later terms a Brahmin, and the mother is not. See, and yet he is the sage par excellence. Guru Purnama is originally dedicated to Vedavyasa. So to be the sage par excellence, it's not necessary that your mother is from a sage family. And so that is the model that the Buddha has in mind. When he says to Virudhava, no, there's no problem, you are a Kshatriya because your father is, regardless of what your mother is. But Virudhava doesn't understand it that way. You see, he is with the new system of endogamy. He says, no, you see, to be a Kshatriya, both your parents have to be of the Kshatriya caste. So that system begins apparently among the upper class, and so that's gradually taken over by the whole society. So by 2000 years ago, by the beginning of the Christian age, that is the norm in Hindu society.
So can we say that dharma is something that is law of the natural order? It has been in continuous process, and the humans have perceived in the way they wanted. They observed the nature, they saw the nature to be in a specific natural order, and that is how dharma was adopted from the nature into the humanity. Can we say that, or what are thoughts about it?
Well, what you see in nature is that species, seek individuals from the same species.
Yeah.
And the more they differ from one another, the less chance that they can procreate together. So you have lions and tigers who can procreate, but only one generation. You have horses and donkeys who procreate, but only one generation. Interestingly, they look more like their father than like their mother. You see, if a horse and a donkey cross, then the offspring takes after the father. So if the father is a donkey, the offspring brays. If the father is a horse, the offspring whinnies. So, that is taken as a model. You see, among the first biologists, this idea takes root that people are like their father, whereas the mother only provides, the material to,
Comfort.
develop from an inseminated egg to a full human being. But so the characteristics are given by the father.
Okay.
That is what I think Aristotle thought. But Galen, the Greek or Roman physician, observes quite correctly, quite commonsensically, that people take after both their parents.
Okay.
You see, if your father is white and your mother is black, you are not going to be pure white. You're going to be to some extent white, to some extent black, but not pure white. So clearly, you're a mixture of both your parents. So, sensibly, in a way, the idea of purely paternal caste gives way to endogamy. You are pure caste if both your parents are of that caste. So for the last 2000 years, it's been like that. Most of society followed it. But that's not intrinsic to Hinduism. I mean, Hinduism has existed for many centuries before this caste system came about. And so there is no real reason to stick to it. And so now it is gradually disappearing.
So the idea of dharma is like its coexistence. At one side, we can say it lays out a specific set of rules, regulations for the society to coexist.
Yes.
But as and when time continued, the Varnashrama came into being, and the duties were assigned to the sections, though not hereditarily, but it was acquired based on one's quality, based on one's physicality, etc. And where is it that Swadharma sits among this?
Well, nowadays you have apologists who say, oh, it has nothing to do with birth, qualities, everybody has his own qualities. No, you see, qualities are from your parents to a large extent. So if you say that the parents don't matter, you will say, oh, if a black couple has children, chances are just as well that they are white or that they are black. The color of the parents doesn't matter. Well, no, the color of the parents does matter. And so a white couple is likely to have white children. A black couple is likely to have black children. So if you apply that same logic to general character traits, then these traits are largely by birth. If your father is a strong man and a willful man, a tyrannical man and so on, probably, your children are likely to be like that. If the father has outspoken talent or an outspoken defect, the children are likely to have that. Not certain, but likely. So to deny that birth factor, well, I don't know. The Bhagavad Gita, written close to the common age. Now, mind you, this is debatable. When was the Bhagavad Gita written? You see, the Mahabharata war is a historical event. It really happened. Krishna, Arjuna, and so on really existed.
Yeah.
Like for instance, there is a person in the genealogy of the Pandavas and the Kauravas, namely this Satyavati, this the foremother of the Pandavas and Kauravas, the one who gets impregnated by this Parashara. So one of her sons is this Vedavyasa. Then from Shantanu she gets Vichitravirya, who is the social father of Dhritarashtra and Pandu, and therefore the social grandfather of the Kauravas and Pandavas, but not their biological ancestor. You see, he dies before he can impregnate his wives, and so then the family matriarch Satyavati calls in her other son to impregnate her daughters-in-law. Complicated story, which of course caste-wise is a very complicated affair, because this son is the prototype of a Brahmin, this her first son, Vedavyasa, yet her progeny are princes, are kshatriyas. Now there you see already that, caste was not a firm thing at the time.
Yeah.
There was a sense of class identity, but that was not yet purely by birth. But you see, that took place in the middle of the second millennium BC. This Jijit Nadumuri Ravi, he has researched this more than anyone else. So you have this recent book of his, Geography of the Mahabharata,
Vedas,
where he shows at length that this must be around 1800 BC. He gives the date of 1793. So about the exact year, I'll leave some,
Yeah.
some space for descent, but it's around that period. The second millennium, definitely. Not 3,100 something, not 5,561, and not 900 BCE either, as some Western scholars say. However, a lot of the Mahabharata is written much later. Like, for instance, it mentions the Yavanas, which are the Ionians, the Greeks. It mentions the Romakas, the Romans. It mentions the Chinas, the Chinese, a name that even in China only dates back to the 3rd century BCE, not earlier. So it's like 1500 years after the actual war took place. In Greece, the Iliad is based on a real historical war that took place about 500 years earlier. So stories were told about this, and then one poet gathers these stories and then forges them into a big epic. So something similar has happened in India. In India, the time between the event and the final epic is even longer. So it gets written and rewritten and expanded until some 200 or so BCE. And so the one core text is the Bhagavad Gita, which is made to look like one of the earliest texts. Like it is told by this Sanjay. It is as if the story is told by Sanjay to Dhritarashtra, which is a characteristic of the earliest parts of the Mahabharata. So the Mahabharata itself says that there is an older part, a central part called Jaya, then a larger part Bharata, and then a much larger part Mahabharata, right? So the Bhagavad Gita is shaped as if an early part, probably it's really a later part. And one indication is that it has this classical idea of caste. So the modern apologists say, no, it has no caste by birth. It says on the contrary explicitly, but caste is by guna and karma, by your qualities and your work. Well, about karma, of course, later Hindus will say, oh, no, it's about karma in the sense of what you have done in your past life. The causal relation between your past life's record and your present day, experiences and tendencies. So it is by birth. Okay, so that's the classical idea. In the Middle Ages, that's how they thought. Yes, you see, caste is entirely by birth. Of course, it is by your qualities, but your qualities are caused by your birth, which is not nonsensical, because effectively people look like their parents. People take after their parents, so see, this is by birth. Now, effectively, what does the Bhagavad Gita say?
About Swadharma.
Arjuna, yes, about Swadharma. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. Okay, I'll say it explicitly.
Yeah.
So, Arjuna is said to have the Swadharma of taking up the fight. Now, why? You see, people say, oh no, you see, caste is by people's tendencies, their innate abilities, and so on. Now, okay, what does Arjuna do? He starts doubting. You see, the courage sinks into his shoes, as we say in our language. You see, he doesn't have it in him to engage, the enemy side, to start a fight with them. On the contrary, he says, I would rather lose my kingdom, lose my honor, lose everything, than to start killing all these cousins of mine, these teachers of mine, and so on. He does not take a martial attitude at all. He takes a Gandhian attitude. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Krishna says, no, it is your Swadharma to fight. It's better to do your Swadharma than anybody else's Swadharma. There may be people in society who do not have the duty to fight, but you have the duty to fight. Now, why is that? Not because of his tendencies. On the contrary, he has pacifist tendencies. But by birth, he is a Kshatriya.
Yeah.
He's a descendant, at least socially, perhaps not biologically, but he's a descendant of King Shantanu. And so he has a duty to fight because he is born in the Kshatriya caste. That at least is how Hindus for about 2000 years have interpreted the Bhagavad Gita. And to say that, oh no, it is based on your work and your qualities, that's not a contradiction with it being based on birth. Because your qualities are based on your ancestry. You see, if your ancestors are black, you are likely to be black yourself. If they were yellow, you are likely to be yellow yourself. If they were strong and, then you are likely to be strong yourself, and so on. So there is no contradiction between it being by guna and it being by janma. Similarly with your work, you see, your work likely is the same as what your father did. In an old society, people didn't go to school. No, you see, their father was a blacksmith, so they learned the trade at home. And by the time they were like 16 and doubting about, their parents, I don't want to do what my father did and so on, by that time, they have already learned all the skills from their father. It's just more practical to step into their father's footstep than to start learning something new. So most people were by guna and by karma the same as their parents. So there is no contradiction between guna, karma, and janma.
Okay.
So, right or wrong, but for 2000 years, the Gita has been interpreted as supporting caste by birth.
So, in between, as you said, that there was a time when Arjuna showed a Gandhian perspective of dharma, and that is where Lord Krishna, he comes up and says, no, this is not your dharma, rather this is not your swadharma, rather your duty to fight is what you're made to.
Yeah.
But Krishna also, if you see, he by birth he comes from the Kshatriya Kula, though later on, he goes into the Yadava family and he comes up as a Yadava king.
Yeah.
Though he is originally a Kshatriya.
Wait a minute. You see, words also have a history. The word Yadava originally means the descendants of Yadu.
Yeah.
Yadu is a prince who is the brother of Puru, the ancestor of the Pauravas, the Vedic tribe, of Anu, the ancestor of the Anavas, the Proto-Iranians, of the Druhyus, of the Turvashas. And so the Yadavas are one branch of the lunar dynasty. They are Kshatriyas, at least those who, are reckoned among the Yadava dynasty, including Krishna. So Krishna is a Kshatriya.
Yeah.
And in the 20th century, the word Yadava has been adopted by a number of cattle raising castes, the Gujars, the Ahirs, and so you see, the first thing that happened as caste became looser, became more open under the influence of Gandhi, among others, of Ambedkar, among others, was not that caste became irrelevant, but that there was a rapprochement between castes that were like close on the caste ladder. So different agricultural castes came together, different cattle raising castes came together, and so these Ahirs, Gujars, and so on, they sort of coalesced into a mega caste that took the name of Krishna, because Krishna was also a cattle raiser. Gopala, Govinda, and so on, cow herd. So they took the name Yadava, but they were not Kshatriyas.
Okay.
They were, in modern terms, OBCs, other backward castes. But they took a name that referred originally to a specific group of Kshatriyas, which in fact is typical, because as long as caste exists, there has been a certain upward mobility. People try to become upper castes, largely by imitating the upper castes. Like, for instance, by taking on vegetarianism, the way some Brahmins had adopted vegetarianism. So Vaishyas adopted vegetarianism and so on. Other backward castes adopted vegetarianism to become more prestigious. And so that's what the Ahirs, Gujars, and so on did to, imitate these Kshatriyas. They named themselves after these Kshatriyas.
Okay. That's a great clarification which you made. I mean, but my question is, when Lord Krishna comes to the rescue of Arjuna, in giving him a great clarification, to move on from in seeking peace, wherein peace has already been negotiated, but the time is to do your duty, which is to fight. So at that perspective, what is it that Arjuna he learns from his previous learnings? Though he knew his duty was to fight as Kshatriya, but in the battlefield he sees his relatives, friends, own great fathers, and at that time he finds it difficult to raise the arms against them. So at that point of time, which aspect of Dharma and Swadharma does Krishna give it to him, which makes Arjuna to fight? I mean, the philosophical aspect of Dharma and Swadharma is what I'm trying to bring out.
Well, we only have the Pandava version, of course. I mean, as a historian, when I read something, I have to ask myself, but is this really true? Okay, before we go into the Pandava-Kaurava war, let's take another Vedic war, the Battle of the 10 Kings.
10 Kings,
Yes. So in the Vedas, at some point, the Pauravas, and especially the Bharata dynasty among them, fights against the Anava tribe and the remnants of the Drugyu tribe. Most of the Drugyus have left India, but apparently some remain, so they become part of the Anava coalition, the 10 Kings, who form a defensive alliance against the expanding, conquering king Sudas of the Bharata dynasty. Now, many Vedic believers say, this is a battle between good and evil. The Vedic king Sudas is the good guy, and the others, are selfish and, they're jealous and they're evil and so on. So they fight against the Vedic king. Now, if you read the Vedic story, you have to conclude something else. You see, this king Sudas, he had first conquered in the east. He, together with his court priest Vishwamitra, the author of the Gayatri Mantra, crosses the Yamuna, conquers some territory there, which becomes Panchala, with headquarters in Kampilia. And in fact, the clan of Vishwamitra settles there, the Kushikas, and even expands farther to the east. There's a river, the Koshiki, in the sort of border area of what is now Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. So they're part of this conquest. That's why later on, 2000 years later in the Puranas, there is a sort of a controversy between Vasishtha and Vishwamitra, where Vasishtha is a Brahmin and Vishwamitra is described as a Kshatriya, as a king. So in the Vedic age, these categories didn't exist yet, but this much we know, that Vasishtha was very much a priest, like he writes about the religion of the enemies in the Battle of the Ten Kings and so on. He's very much a religious, writer, composer, let's say, whereas the other guy is mainly known for his participation in a conquest. And not just as a priest, as a court priest of a king, but as himself doing conquest. So it makes sense to retrospectively describe him as Kshatriya. Now the point is that the king that he serves, Sudas, practices conquest, expands his territory, crosses the Yamuna, conquers a lot of territory there. Then later he sets his sight on the west. You see, he starts from Haryana, he conquers UP, now he conquers Punjab. So he conquers, across this Vipas River, Beas River. The fight takes place at the Parushni River, the present-day Ravi River, which forms the boundary between India and Pakistan today. And the enemies are coming from the next river, the Asikni River. And so they come from the west, he comes from the east, okay. They clash on the Parushni. And so you can say retrospectively that the 10 kings had a good reason to get together, because they had to defend themselves, they had to defend their hereditary kingdom against this conqueror, right? Now, if you think defense is morally rather superior to trying to conquer what is somebody else's, then you can't say that Sudas is the good guy and the 10 kings are the bad guys. No. Morally speaking, it's a very ordinary war, even though in world history is very important. It shapes the history of India, but even of West Asia, because it makes the Persians leave India, and later this will lead to the creation of the Persian Empire, the war between the Greeks and the Persians, and so on and so on. I mean, world history would have looked very different, but for this Battle of the 10 Kings. But so the point is that this pious religious interpretation of a war of good against evil, can't be maintained. It's a very ordinary war for territory. There's a conqueror involved, there are defenders involved. And so you can't piously interpret it as the war between good and evil. Or maybe you can, but then the evil partner is Sudas. He's the Vedic side, right? So, there may well be a difference between the historical account and the religious account. Now, that probably can also be said of the Mahabharata war. So, you see, Hindus have learned to interpret it as a war of for dharma,
Dharma.
between the dharmic side, the Pandava side, and the adharmic side. Well, maybe it's not so simple. And so the story about the disrobing of Draupadi, now there you can say, yes, that is really adharmic. But you see, is that really the source of the battle? It's just like in the Iliad, that also has a story a bit similar to the beginning of the Ramayana, namely a wife who gets abducted. But is that really what the war was about? You see, if you go look into this war 500 years earlier, before Homer wrote this epic, that was a war for territory that had economic reasons and so on. Probably this story about a wife abducted is maybe historical, but is a side story. The war was for very tangible reasons, and here likewise. You see, maybe there was some episode about some woman being insulted, maybe quite possibly. Yet, you see, the war most likely was for very ordinary, typical reasons, the kind of reasons that people make war for.
What about the case of Ramayana, wherein Sita was abducted by Ravana, and there also we have this adharma versus dharma?
Yeah. Well, probably, Valmiki was probably not a liar. There will be something to it.
Considering it as an established.
But you see, the good thing about these epics is that they're not black and white, they're not fairy tales about the good guys and the bad guys. That's made of it later. But what you see is that the good guys usually have some dark spot in their past that explains their suffering. And the bad guys also have some things going for them. Like Duryodhana takes care of Karna, who is wrongly misunderstood. And, there are certain things to be said for their position also. So the moralistic interpretation, it's a war for dharma, it's not the whole story.
Okay.
Yeah.
So coming to karma.
Yes.
And we have dharma, then according to dharma, we have the understanding of what individuals Swadharma needs to be.
Yes.
And then finally, interpreting Swadharma and coming to an actionable deed, that is karma.
Yeah.
So how do you see this from the historical perspective, keeping in mind the background of dharma and Swadharma, karma?
Well, in the telling of the Kurukshetra war, you do find elements, explanatory elements that refer to past lives. Not many, but here and there are very significant ones. Like the reason for Shikandin doing what he does. So he's instrumental in the killing of Bhishma. Why? Because in a past life, he was Amba, the sister of Ambika and Ambalika, who are the mothers of Dhartarashtra and Pandu. So she has a reason for hating Bhishma. Because Bhishma is the cause of her breakup with her great love. Because he feels humiliated in front of her by Bhishma overpowering him. So she hates Bhishma. And so she prays for being reborn in a position where she can take revenge. So in those days, women are not supposed to fight. And she feels she has to, cut his head off or something equivalent. So she wants to be reborn as a soldier and get into a fight where she can legitimately kill Bhishma. And so that's what she does. Her wishes are fulfilled. And so she becomes Shikandin, who does shoot Bhishma. So here and there this appears. Now, to what extent? You see, when you read the all these testimonies of past lives gathered by Ian Stevenson, by Erlendur Haraldsson, by Hans ten Dam, researchers into what is called regression, bringing people back to past lives, or analyzing the testimonies of children who claim to remember past lives. So I've talked to two of those researchers. I've also read their books. And so what strikes me about that is that they do make a credible case for reincarnation. Of course, there are still critics who are not convinced. But, it's a good case. However, what is not there is this idea of reward and punishment. You see, in many cases, you have people who clearly are influenced by the contents of their past lives. Like a soldier dies on a battlefield and is reborn with only one thought, is to continue the battle and win the battle after all. I have a nephew who, from childhood onwards, absolutely wanted to become a pilot. Now, he had a defect, namely color blindness, which normally excludes you from the training for becoming a pilot. So he was looking for loopholes to somehow become a pilot anyway, and he succeeded. Now he's a pilot. So first he had to prove himself, because even then he couldn't become a normal pilot on commercial flights. But so he very much proved himself, and so finally they relented and they let him become, an airliner pilot. And so you see, this determination to become a pilot strongly suggests that, you see, he in a past life was a pilot, felt, good in that role, and knew that that's what he wanted to become. Now, I'm not sure of that. It just looks like that. About myself, you see, many people have said, oh, but you see, in your past life, you must have been a Hindu. And, you saw apparently that in India they were not succeeding. So you were looking for some other position, to become an Indologist, an outsider looking in. And looking for ways to make yourself useful for the Hindu cause. Again, I don't know. I have no memory of past lives at all. I have had clairvoyance tell me what I was in a past life. I don't know what is true of it. So, of course they have worked that also here and there into the Mahabharata story. I don't know what is true of it. So it's there.
Okay.
As a literary motive, I can certify that it's there, but whether it's true or not, I don't know.
Okay. So one can say that Swadharma is not the same for everyone. Like one's perception or perceiving or understanding of Dharma and one's social situation, one's condition of economic prosperity, that is what determines the Swadharma. And again, coming to the karma, out of that, understanding a simple or a minimal aspect of understanding probably transforms into karma. So how do you see this funnel aspect?
Yeah, well, there is a difference between the traditional Hindu conception, and the reason why the idea of reincarnation presently is quite popular in the West, or has become popular, because I mean it's not a Christian idea, it's clearly something that has come over ever since people like Max Muller spread these classics from the East. And so now the idea of reincarnation has become quite popular. There are a few Greek sources already where you do find this idea, like Pythagoras was a great believer in reincarnation. You also have the story of, it's either Ulysses or Aeneas, one of the Greek heroes, who goes into the underworld and then gives a description of what happens after death. So after death, you know, the really miserable people, they go into oblivion. They disappear. And the great heroes, they go to the Elysian fields, to paradise. And they don't come back either. But most people come back. So they go into this river, the river of forgetfulness. You know, they immerse themselves in that river, which means that they forget all the memories of their past life. And then, fresh, you see, blank slate, they get reborn. So the idea of reincarnation is not entirely unknown in the West. You also have different peoples, like the Romans describe how the Celts, the Gaulish warriors, are very brave because they believe in reincarnation. Both Caesar and Cicero give this description that they are so brave on the battlefield because they don't believe that death is real. You know, you don't really die. It's like taking off your garments when you go to sleep and putting them on, or putting new ones on the next day.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what is said by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita.
True.
He makes that comparison.
He makes it that simple.
Yes. And so he says to Arjuna, you don't need to fear dying because death isn't real. You also don't need to fear killing, because for the other guy, death is also not real. So if you kill him, you don't really kill him. Now, it's a dangerous idea, mind you, because it justifies killing. And so that's what the Celtic warriors also believe. So you see, when they face the Romans on the battlefield, they don't mind killing them, because they come back anyway. And they don't mind, you know, risking death. They don't mind dying because it's not real death. They come back. And so similarly, you know, the Pandavas on the battlefield don't need to fear death. So, I mean, this idea of reincarnation is quite widespread. Like the Native Americans believed in it. The Druze, some semi-Islamic sect in West Asia, they also believe in reincarnation. It's not an exclusively Hindu thing. But, you know, the idea of karma, that's rather typically Hindu. Yeah. You see, some people, for example, believe that it's a reward to be reborn. That not everybody gets reborn, you have to deserve it. Whereas the Hindu conception is almost the reverse. You know, it's almost a punishment to be reborn. You have to get rid of this fatal tendency to get reborn again and again.
The cycle.
That's what Buddhism is about.
Yeah.
So, so you have these different conceptions. In the Vedas, you have the idea of action at a distance. That there is called karma. Karma there is not automatically rebirth. Karma is the fact that when you perform a Vedic ritual, you get a result. Like, for instance, you know that you'll have to face the enemy, so you do a Vedic ritual hoping for victory in battle. So there, ideally, you perform this ritual, and the fruit of the ritual is caused by some unseen mechanic which materializes tomorrow on the battlefield in victory. And all kinds of other benefits are sought to be obtained by particular rituals. So this mechanic, this unseen mechanic, connecting the cause, the ritual, with the consequence, that is karma. Karma is action at a distance. And so here you get a reincarnationist interpretation. The action is what you do in your past life. Action at a distance results in the consequence of what you experience in this life. So I think, but I know that that is debated, not just among Hindus, also Western scholars are also not united about this. So some say this finds its origin in Vedic doctrines. Others say the Vedas didn't know anything of reincarnation. This only comes when you see the Vedic doctrine spreads to the east, to Magadha, where you had a belief in reincarnation already many generations. Which is why in Jainism and Buddhism, this is an absolutely central doctrine, which is much less the case in the Vedic traditions, where it is taken over, integrated, but it's not really so central. So there are different, and I mean, none of us was there 3,000-4,000 years ago. So there are different possibilities, we still have to live with that. But at any rate, you get this idea of causation by what you did in your past life. Now here, there are different opinions, different explanations. One is the very widespread idea of the retributive karma, which means reward or punishment. So you do something now and you get your reward or your punishment in the future. Perhaps in this life, like Maria, the heroine of the movie The Sound of Music. You see, at some point she gets infatuated with the captain, a widower that she's working for. And he's engaged to some new woman, but the engagement breaks off. Mm-hmm. And then the girl who had accepted that she has no chance suddenly gets her chance. So she's very happy about this. She starts singing, "Somewhere in the past, I must have done something good."
That's always there.
Yes, and it's entirely Western. That's before the idea of reincarnation got, all over the place, being imported from India. But so, that again, you see that reincarnationist idea was not common in the West, but here and there it also existed. So that idea is there, causation by experiences from the past. But you have to see, even without reincarnation, it can be there. Like in Christianity, you don't have the belief in reincarnation. Yeah. Not at all. You see, in Christianity, you don't have the idea that life and rebirth is the problem. Like in Buddhism, you want to get rid of the cycle of rebirth. Here, death is the problem.
Judgment Day.
And so you have a different kind of karma. You have a next life, namely after death. You go to heaven or to hell or so. So Judgment Day, what you do in this life determines what happens to you on Judgment Day. So there is a connection between this life and your afterlife. what you do in this life determines whether you go to hell or to heaven. That's also karma, though there's no reincarnation.
True.
So you have all these different, and in fact, I think in the age of science, when you are all enjoined to pursue and propagate the scientific temper according to India's constitution, actually we shouldn't settle for less than finding out what the truth of the matter is. So I'm quite happy with this research into past lives. But, whether the results are definitive, now that I can't say.
Okay. So we spoke about karma,
Yeah.
but then I want to dissect a little bit more into karma.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about nishkama karma, wherein the fruits of karma are not to be expected?
Well, the question there is whether karma means what people nowadays mean by karma. You see, nowadays they mean this causation across incarnations. Back then, you see, the word karma had more like the Vedic sense of ritual action.
Yeah.
And the causation by ritual action.
But my question is about from the modern perspective of doing one's duty, but not trying to earn for the results or the fruits of the action.
Yeah, but you see, the sense of doing one's duty, is that what is meant by karma?
Yeah.
You see, nowadays, people talk about karma yoga, and by that they mean doing your duty.
Yeah.
And they even say, oh yeah, you can also reach enlightenment by karma yoga, meaning doing your duty. I don't know, I'm all in favor of doing your duty, but do you reach enlightenment by doing your duty? I mean, in all cultures, most of whom do not have a notion of enlightenment, they do recommend that you do your duty. Christians who don't believe in enlightenment, who have no concept of enlightenment at all, nevertheless think that you should do your duty. So, you see, karma may mean something else. Like you have this karma marga, the way of karma. You have the way of jnana, of knowledge. You have the way of bhakti, of devotion. And you have the way of karma, the way of action. Now, does that mean doing your duty? You see, in those days, you had this distinction between the Vedic karma kanda, the action half, and jnana kanda, the knowledge half. By that, what was meant exactly at the time of Krishna, which was the time of the beginning Upanishads. You get the idea that, okay, we've been doing Vedic rituals, but is that really all there is to it? Like you have the career of the first Upanishadic Rishi, Yajnavalkya. First, he's a great Vedic ritualist. He writes the Shatabhata Brahmana, which mostly is about Vedic ritual and how to do it and what it means and what it can produce. And then later in life, he starts practicing breathing techniques and meditation and so on. He writes or composes the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which is precisely about the self. You see, ritual is no longer important. Getting to know, to understand, to realize the self, that now is important. Okay. Perhaps, you see, here again the jury is still out on what really happened. Perhaps this is because of his geographical relocation. He moves to the east. He comes from Panchala, from western Uttar Pradesh. He goes to Kashi, to the Janaka's court in Videha, in Mithila, in Bihar. And so there you get a different culture where, Jainism and Buddhism result, where you have this idea of renunciation, of reincarnation and trying to get rid of the cycle of incarnations. And so what results is this jnana kanda. So ritual is no longer important.
Yeah.
You see, getting this knowledge through a meditation, that now is important. And so there you get the shift from karma kanda to jnana kanda. And then you get the Gita that says, well, yeah, there's karma kanda, there's jnana kanda, but I'll tell you, I have it, bhakti. Yeah, the bhakti marga. After the jnana marga and the karma marga, you get the bhakti marga. Now, isn't that propaganda? You acknowledge the existing margas, and then you give this new marga, the bhakti marga. I don't know, I don't want to prejudice this question, and I know that many Hindus will not agree with me, but this bhakti marga, is this really a substitute or a valid competitor to the existing karma marga and jnana marga? Ask yourself, you see, does bhakti give you enlightenment? In fact, does karma give you enlightenment? You see, these Vedic rituals, are they meant for enlightenment? You see, some people with the scientific temper or justifying themselves by invoking the scientific temper, say they don't believe in the karma marga in the original sense. Do rituals work? You see, do you get the victory of the battlefield because you asked for it during a ritual? Do you get economic success? Do you get, cure from your disease? Do you win a woman's heart by doing these rituals? Maybe, maybe not. That's debatable. Then jnana. You see, do you achieve enlightenment? Do you achieve liberation? Do you achieve the zero experience? Do you achieve kaivalya? Disentanglement from the objects of consciousness through jnana, through consciousness culture, through meditation? Maybe, maybe not, some practitioners say so. Okay, now maybe you reach enlightenment through meditation, but do you reach enlightenment through rituals? I strongly doubt that.
I do doubt.
Do you reach enlightenment through bhakti? You see, here you get a very important question.
We have examples.
Can you reach enlightenment through practicing other religions? You see, some Christians say, yeah, but you don't need these Hindu things. We can also reach enlightenment. Now, I don't think enlightenment is a Christian target. You want salvation, which is something else than enlightenment. And of course, there have been Christian mystics who thought something that you could call perhaps enlightenment. But they didn't conceive of it as enlightenment. They still conceived of it as getting closer to God, severing the distance that has been created between man and God through eternal sin or something. They didn't call it enlightenment. But yeah, maybe you see some mental practice is being done that is not prescribed by the church, but that certain Christian mystics have done. Maybe that's quite similar to what is done by bhakti Hindus, like prayer, for example. You see, prayer does something. And indeed, you see, nowadays there are neurological studies of the effect of prayer.
Yeah.
Prayer works. People who do prayer, they are happier, they are calmer in life, they are better able to face crises. The same thing that is said about the practice of yoga. Because it is a mental practice, it requires concentration. Maybe it will call, this as directed to Jesus or directed to the Virgin Mary, but what effectively happens is concentration, is calming the mind, is throwing out all kinds of mental disturbances. So you get results that are similar to the effects of yoga, right? This whole question of all religions are essentially the same, that deserves to be asked. And so my opinion about it is, no, all religions are not the same. Nevertheless, some things that people do while belonging to a particular religion, they may very well be the same. Okay. So you see these prayers, forget about Jesus, but praying to Jesus may have the same effect as praying to Vishnu or so. So it's not the object, Jesus or any of the other gods, but it's the fact of, as a human being, practicing prayer, practicing bhakti, that may be the same across religions.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So I have a hypothesis in my mind regarding yoga.
Mm.
In Gita and in Upanishads, we have this aggregation of yoga as bhakti, jnana and karma. But when it comes to a person practicing concentration or practicing meditation, isn't it the actual combination of all these three yogas that takes you to the path of concentration, meditation? Because without the understanding or without the jnana, it is not possible to dedicate oneself, that is the bhakti. And then to do it with the body together is a combination of all the three yogas. How do you see this from the perspective of what Swami Vivekananda explained it as the Raja Yoga?
Yes. Well, if I want to say something intellectually satisfying, I should perhaps do better than to say, yeah, it's a combination of all of them. That sounds like a too easy an answer. Yet, it may well be the correct answer.
Okay.
So, what you say, some bhakti is necessary, some jnana is necessary. Well, maybe so.
It's a hypothesis.
You see, the thing is that to make it interesting enough, to make it engaging enough, yes, some bhakti is necessary. Like in manuals for what to do with mantras, they say, you should take a mantra that you believe in, that makes sense to you. There have been these experiences where, mantras don't have to mean anything. It doesn't have to be Om Namah Shivaya. Let's take something without any devotion to Shiva.
Yeah.
Let's take a mantra, one. If you really practice that, you will also get the same results. The sort of pacifying effect of concentrating on a mantra will also be there, whether it is Shiva or whether it is one. True. However, it turns out, practice teaches that you're just going to do your mantra more likely if it is to something you believe in rather than to just one. So that's also why it's important to know the meaning of your mantra. If you don't know what it means, you may ask yourself, am I not making a fool of myself?
True.
It's like these people who get some Chinese character tattooed on their skin.
Yeah.
If you don't know what Chinese characters mean, maybe they are tattooing something about, I am a ridiculous idiot or something, And so similarly, if you're, saying a mantra, maybe it's something foolish. So it's important to know what it means and to choose a mantra that you can believe in, that makes sense to you. Hmm? So in that sense, bhakti is important. You have to be devoted to what you say. You have to really believe in it, to you mean it, to lay your heart in it. In fact, shraddha, belief, faith in Sanskrit, literally, etymologically means to put your heart in it. Okay, so a combination of jnana and bhakti makes sense. In fact, that's already there in the oldest Vedic rituals. You see, Agnim Ilai, in the very first Vedic hymn, it is said, I worship the fire, right? But so that worship has to be there. This upasana, sitting at the feet of, submitting to something, that has to be there from the beginning. So in that sense, you see, bhakti is not, a new movement started in the Middle Ages by, Tukaram and Tulsidas and so on. Bhakti is there from the beginning. And so bhakti also some people with bhakti think of this sentimental, Hare Krishna thing and so on. But bhakti is all over the place from the earliest Vedas. Ritual likewise is also all over the place. If people start taking yoga serious, you see, in the West especially, many people don't want ritual. They think ritual is childish. It's like a theater. If you dress up, a statue of the deity and you wash it and you feed it and so on, that's like a theater. That's child's play. So some people start with a strong prejudice against ritual. And yet, you see, once you start doing it, ritual comes naturally to you. Like, you see, many think that Buddhism is superior because it doesn't do ritual, it only does meditation. But go look, what Buddhist monks do. Of course, they again develop new rituals, and ritual is part of it. I've done Zazen for some years, and so in there, yes, you started doing meditation for an hour, and then follows a ritual. You start chanting the Heart Sutra. Makahanya haramita shingyo kanji saibo satsugyojin. You can recognize the Sanskrit in it. It's the Japanese pronunciation of a Chinese version of the Heart Sutra. Okay. So it's a prajna paramita. It's a Hanya is prajna, haramita is paramita. Oh. So prajna paramita, hridaya sutra. Anyway, so you start doing that very ritually with, body movements and stuff. And so ritual comes back, and there's nothing against ritual. You shouldn't take it too heavily, but it's just there. So, ritual and meditation and devotion go together.
Okay. One last question.
Yeah.
To make the framework complete.
Yeah.
Your concluding remarks on practice of yoga.
Yeah.
In understanding dharma, swadharma and karma. How deeply should one practice yoga, not necessarily from the asanas perspective, but in understanding the philosophy of yoga, in understanding dharma?
Well, that, of course, by yoga, I don't just mean asana. That's like obvious.
Yeah. But for the viewers, it's required.
Of course. Westerners say, do yoga and meditation. Well, yoga is meditation. But yes, you know, I mean, to put your body in the right condition, it's useful to practice breath techniques and physical techniques. Yes, so they're part of it, but they're not what it's about. Um, Now, yoga and dharma are two different things. I mean, that's why you have two words for it.
Yeah.
Uh,
But they have a linkage.
well, yes and no. Yoga does not really, definitionally imply dharma.
But consciously, one needs to be aware of what.
Well, there are two different things. I mean, yes, you see the first stages of yoga, yama and niyama, of course, are, overlap with dharma. In the Manu Smriti and many other, shastras about how to behave, you get lists of virtues to practice. You have to practice patience and tolerance and truth speaking and non-stealing and non-violence and moderation, and there are a number of virtues to practice, and you find these lists in Indian texts and in Greek texts and in Roman texts and so on. You even find them in the Bible. Watch out though. Many people in the West think that virtues means the Ten Commandments. Like you have in America these questions of, should posters with the Ten Commandments be hung up in courthouses? Well, no, because the Ten Commandments contain a list of virtues, thou shalt not kill, but then they also contain a theology. Namely, thou shalt have no other gods before me, and thou shalt worship no graven images. That's a specific theology, an iconic monotheism, right? That's not there in the Manu list and in, the Upanishadic talk about Daya and Dhamma and so on. There you only have virtues. In this biblical Ten Commandments, you have a list of virtues to practice and a theology. And indeed, that theology is coupled with these virtues to give it more respectability. You see, these virtues are age-old. You can't keep up a society if people steal from each other and kill each other and so on. So it's the mos maiorum, the customs of the ancestors. Through generations of experience, they have concluded, okay, that type of behavior we shouldn't tolerate. That type of behavior we should encourage. And to get that realization, you don't need divine revelations. You don't need, on the Mount Sinai, God who gives these tables with these lists of virtues. Not at all. Just from experience you learn. And you don't need that theology. People without that theology also practice those virtues. Indeed, you see in Hinduism, you have, those virtues being taught without that theology, without monotheism, without aniconism.
Yeah.
So, these virtues are a good thing, and forget about that theology. Now, what do these virtues have to do with yoga? Well, strictly nothing. I mean, you don't need to do yoga to have good use for those virtues. Societies have developed those virtues without having any idea of yoga. I mean, yoga is a newer development. According to, what's his name, Mircea Eliade, yoga stems from shamanism. And indeed, you see, when you look at the iconography of Shiva, you see that anciently he's a shaman. Like sometimes he's depicted smoking hashish, because shamans did. I mean, they took psychedelics to go on vision quests, to evoke, visions or hallucinations. Anyway, but so yoga is a more sophisticated, more advanced development in that same direction, rather than creating exciting visions. You go beyond visions. You go to mental silence. And so here, I mean, I am aware that some people will find it a bit elitist and so on to say that one thing is more advanced than another, is superior to the other. But, I think you can't ignore, if you study it more closely, that this looking for visions, for mental excitement, for visual sensations, that is more primitive than to look for absolute calm. So I think that makes sense, that yoga is an evolute, is a more advanced stage than this, looking for mental excitement as is done in shamanism. Now, I repeat, you see, yoga and dharma and virtues are two different things. However, to develop yoga, to advance in yoga, it is helpful to stick to certain virtues.
Yeah.
I mean, if, for example, you have a habit of shoplifting, what you find after a while is that you don't trust yourself anymore. Wherever you go in, you catch yourself in automatically looking, where can I steal something? Unseen, without consequences to myself. When you take a habit of lying, you become jittery, you become uneasy, and so on. Life becomes far more simple if you take a habit of speaking the truth.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, you see the quiet, the calm, the self-control you seek in yoga is very much promoted by practicing virtue. So in that sense, virtue, which at first has a social reason, you see, living together becomes a lot more easy if you practice virtue. It also gets an inner effect, like it is, I think, Spinoza, one of the Western philosophers, 17th century Dutch Jewish, who said, virtue is its own reward. You see, virtue does not only have the effect of making life in society easier. No, you see, for yourself, it's a very good thing, it's a healthy thing, it's a pleasant thing to practice virtue. You just feel better. And so that's already a good thing.
I think that was really well reduced about connecting yoga with virtues and indirectly trying to say that dharma is kind of linked with sharpening of one's mind, because to understand dharma, swadharma and karma, one needs to be consciously sharp, else it's not perceivable. So maybe yoga can help one to sharpen one's mind, to be more calm and attentive in understanding complex concepts like dharma, swadharma and karma. So I think that would be a good way to put it. What do you think?
Yes, however, you should not see yoga as, first of all, something useful. You see, of course, it can be useful. Like there is this sect of Maharshi Mahesh Yogi. They say that if you meditate in groups, then the crime rate in that city is going down because of the good vibrations generated by meditating together. I have no idea whether this is true or not, but let's assume it is true, then you have found some social use, some very practical good implication of practicing meditation. So maybe it is useful, who knows, but it's not very pure, not a little bit dangerous to reduce yoga to that. Yoga has its own goal, and that's not social utility.
From the personal perspective,
Yeah.
it has utilization.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So if it's socially useful, well, why not? But that's not why we do it.
True. Dr. Elst, it was great interacting with you on like the complex topics of dharma, swadharma, and karma, and trying to blend it with yoga. So again, thank you so much for providing your time for Sangam Talks today. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.